Okay, it's been a while since doing a video. The reason for that is because I've been busy. Like, we'll walk around my mess of a work area and kind of look at a few things that are even currently going on, and then look at some of the old stuff, and I'm gonna check the audio because I don't have the headset on. Probably should toss it on. I'm gonna see if maybe the audio is gonna be better. We still seem to be struggling with how flow rate works. I think I've come to the conclusion that I think that due to the amount of stereotypical and incorrect information and methods or ways to think about how this works, I don't think this is ever going to change. Like, I don't have to. I do hear it every single day, and for those that I talk to on the phone, if they're more open-minded or willing to listen, that's probably a poor way to put it. I go over how it actually works, like the actual, how you find the mass flow rate, how the motor actually, how you count, like you can estimate what the engine's asking for, what the engine is drawing, and all that stuff, because I know I was guilty of this for a super long time. I mean, since high school till probably 2018, because I used people's information that was online that I thought was giving me the right answers, and it was actually wrong, and I spent quite a few years using that data, and essentially that was a wash, because that's not how it's not how it works. That's not how the ECM finds it. That's not how you estimate it for engine design, all that fun stuff. So it was completely incorrect. So yeah, for a very long time, and it was difficult for it to make sense early on, because I didn't understand it, and because I didn't understand it, and you should have a fairly high level of skepticism that it's correct. Yeah, there's two sides. There's either you have a really high level of skepticism that it's going to be right or wrong, or you just believe anything that the first thing that you read that looks complicated because you don't get it. Yeah, I was definitely in both of those categories. Because like I said, early on, and I think the majority of us, I think at some point, I don't think you ever get into this and have it right the first time. I think I would say probably almost all of us start here. When the turbo's making whoosh whoosh sounds and is at full song, we think we just get the flow rate on the map. Where is the compressor map at? Oh. He's the big turbo. So S488. When this thing's making full steam at 50 pounds of boost, or I mean, if you can get it to 50 pounds, awesome. You just go, well, it's making a lot of noise. I must be getting like 221 pounds a minute. I know, I thought that way. I thought at the very top of my RPM band, thing was screaming, making a ton of pressure. I'm singing this thing to 4,000 RPMs. Must be at 221. Wrong. Not how it works. So I'm gonna do it's probably gonna be an infinite series on explaining the same thing over and over. So you get really good at it. And it's not in a bad way. It's a good thing that we have to explain this over and over, because hopefully that means that that's helping teach and allow people that have their own setups to self-diagnose the system, instead of having to go take it somewhere and pay someone to do it, right? That's the whole goal, is so that the DIYer can DIY accurately and without wasting as much money. Because we're gonna waste money. That's what we do. We're hot rod people. So how does this work? Let me check audio and then we'll get to that. Okay, now audio checked out good. So that's straight. The other reason I haven't made a video is I don't like to repeat things. So I feel like that gets boring. But maybe this necessitates repeating. Maybe I'll figure out a way to explain this in a way that makes sense. And I have a bunch of new tools that I've made that I haven't got to test yet because I've been busy working. I haven't got to play on the dyno. I guess tell people the dyno is the most expensive tool I have that I don't really use. Just because of time. One person, there's always repairs and stuff coming in, there's new stuff to do, there's welding, fabrication, design work, computer work, ordering supplies, shipping department. I mean, the whole deal, everything is me, and I have zero problems with that. It just does make it difficult to find playtime, because that's kind of what it is, to get on the dyno and mess around with things. Like, I have a lot of cool ideas. I got a bunch of fancy new tools. I got a MAF sensor for 12 valves. I made a tool to monitor injection pressure on 89 to 02s. Sorry for all the ums. In speech class told us not to do that. And I got the AFR gauge. I've been meaning to use all those and just haven't had a chance. So hopefully in like 3 weeks or so, there's a comm rail coming for a turbo swap that I'm gonna do, good friend. I want to try and see if I can put on the dyno before and after. Then there's a couple 12 valves that I'll be coming in to do. Gosh, I don't know what the ums. So let's get to this. This is all your motor cares about right here. So this my writing is terrible. Sorry about this. And it's weird. Normally aspirated CFM. So we're gonna do this. I'm gonna use screen record with audio to go capture this, but I'll show you guys how this works. Normally aspirated CFM. There's calculators that will show this to you. Times pressure ratio. Pressure ratio is PSI absolute. So that's the pressure outside. So I'm at like 300 feet. That's like 14.6. For practice purposes and learning, I break everything down into SAE. Learn at SAE first, then apply your location. So if you're, 6,000 feet-ish, 7,000 feet, it's 12 PSIA. It's like 11.88, depending on the day and all that fun stuff. I use 12. So your PSI absolute, pressure outside, times PSI gauge. So your gauge is pre-calibrated to read 0 at PSIA 14.7. So it's your PSI gauge plus PSI absolute. So we got 18 pounds of boost. 18 plus 14.7. That's a plus sign. It's a terrible one. Plus. Divided by PSI absolute again. And this, depending on what pressure ratio you want to see, in this case, it's the pressure ratio for the engine. If you want pressure ratio for the compressor map to be really, really strict about it, you have to measure before the intercooler as close to the compressor outlet as you can. The motor doesn't care about the pressure ratio of the turbocharger. The motor only cares about, sorry for going in and out. The motor only cares about the pressure ratio across the cylinder head and at its intake valve. So in this case, we're gonna be using the pressures post intercooler. So this gauge is post intercooler, 18 PSI gauge plus 14.7 divided by 14.7 because we're sea level. Remember, if you're at like 6,500 feet on a decent day, it's like 12. So it'll be 12 plus 18 divided by 12. All right, there's things you can go online, you can figure out what your PSIA is for the day. Generally speaking, you can go check your local airport or weather station, it'll tell you what this is. Sometimes they give you called station pressure. You take the station pressure, which is in inches mercury or kilograms, I think it's the same thing. And you put that into a pressure converter and it'll convert it over to PSIA for you. Times weight of the air per 1 cubic foot. So weight of the air per 1 cubic foot, I will put a chart in again. is temperature based. So you want to measure the temperature of the air as close to the intake valve as possible. If you want to measure it before the turbocharger, that's fine. It just doesn't give you anything because it's the system's flow rate, not the singular entity's flow rate. And then you'd be looking at CFM. You need to use a MAF sensor that can tell you airspeed to do that. So let's just say it's a decent day. It's 100 degrees. It's 80 degrees outside, and we have 100 degrees coming out of the intercooler going into the engine. So 100 degrees comes out to 0.07 pounds per cubic foot. So normal aspirated CFM times pressure ratio times the weight of the air per 1 cubic foot. So we will use a 359 cubic inch Cummins engine, 80% volumetric efficiency, 2,000 RPMs. It's 166.2 CFM. That's the normal. That's what the motor is drawing at this condition. This I should be able to figure out very accurately soon what this is with the MAF sensor. And there's a lot of things that affect this as far as turbo diesels go. That's a whole other deal. So it's 166.2 CFM. We got 18 pounds of boost. 18 plus 14.7 divided by 14.7, 2.2. I think it's 2 point, whatever decimal number. Let's use 2.2. If you haven't noticed, this is the factory Dodge truck. It's 166 times 2.2 times 0.07, right? Those are our three things. That gives us 25.59 pounds per minute of air. So if we were to go to a compressor map, and we wanted to plot ourselves on here, we're at 25 pounds a minute at 2.2, right? So right there. That's where you're at. You want that point. Say that's your main operating condition. That's where you are at the most. You want that to be at an efficient location. But there's the catch to that. The efficient location does not necessarily mean that the system runs well, because it's compressor efficiency and not turbine efficiency. That's a whole other deal that we'll have to get into. But that's how you find the pounds minute flow rate that the motor is consuming. MAF sensors are mounted ahead of turbochargers on turbocharged engines, both spark ignition and diesel. MAF sensor displays that what the turbocharger consumes and what the engine consumes is the same weight but a different CFM. But how? Right? So the weight that goes by the MAF and the weight per minute that goes in through the engine is the same number. That's why the MAF sensor can be used all on its own. Now, the MAF sensor on a lot of vehicles isn't used 100% of the time due to airspeed, right? A MAF sensor works off of airspeeds. So if you have a certain size tube, you'll reach the maximum allowed airspeed at a certain point and have to switch over to a different system to run the motor. Or if the tube's big, at low airspeeds, the MAF sensor reads poorly and you run off of a different system until the engine RPM comes up. So there's two different areas that generally on engines, MAF sensors are used. It's either at the low end, and then it switches off to a virtual system, or it works off of, runs off the virtual system on the low end, and then switches to the MAF at the high end. That's due to air speeds and air directional changes and pressure gradients that occur at those different conditions. I'm guessing it has to do with the accuracy due to the quantity of fuel being injected being fairly small in relationship to the sensor's reading capacity. That to have a more accurate system, you want to have a narrower system that the MAF runs within. So they usually work in either of the two sides. But that is true. So how is the weight that the MAF sensor reads the same for both the turbocharger and the engine? That's why we can plot it on a map, on a compressor map, but the CFM is different. All right, let's get to that. Okay. 359 cubic inch engine, 2,000 RPMs, 80% VE, 18 PSI gauge, sea level. So normally aspirated, this 359 cubic inch engine consumes 166.2 CFM. So this is what 162, 166.2 CFM looks like, right? Let's just say it's this size. This is what the motor can draw through. Now you divide this by 6, and then divide it by the number of intake of strokes. Then you have the actual CFM per one cylinder per one event. This is what the motor can consume spatially, right? This is what it can take in. What a turbocharger does, right? So we have 166.2. So the MAF sensor is going to show this, the 365 CFM number. How do we get 365 CFM to fit in the same space as 166.2 CFM? Well, we compress it by the pressure ratio. The pressure ratio takes 365 CFM because air is compressible. It smooshes it together so it spatially takes up the same space as 166.2. And because you've crammed everything together, the 166.2 CFM now weighs more than it does normally. So at 14.7 PSIA, at 100 degrees, 166.2 CFM weighs 11.5 pounds, 11.63 something, 4. Now we took 365 CFM, smashed it down into the same space that 166.2 takes up, and we intercooled it back down to 100 degrees because you get what's called adiabatic temperature rise. It's actually more than adiabatic. But if you wanted to look into how compressed, we got to do this on another video. Compressor efficiency as far as how it relates to the thermal efficiency and stuff like that it's a whole other deal. All right, so stuff gets hotter when you compress it down. That's just natural. So adiabatic means if it was 100% efficient minus some wall losses and stuff. So isentropic means 100% efficient, no losses. Adiabatic is 100% efficient with some losses to outside. You'd still have a temperature rise going from this cube and smashing it down to this cube. So if you had a balloon, and you say you have a 2-inch tube and a 6-inch balloon, right? So the 2-inch tube can only consume a 2-inch balloon. If you took that 6-inch balloon and you smushed it down in a process that would allow it to not pop, it's gonna get hotter. But now the tube can consume that balloon. And it's the same CFM because it's a water bottle with the top on it, a balloon that's sealed. The weight and this amount of air in that space is the same as it was when it was bigger, and it weighs the same because it can't escape. You can't lose it and you can't gain it. You have losses and gains here because we have actual real world losses and VE loss. There's a whole other bunch of stuff, but we're just trying to get the math down, and then from there things can get more complicated. So what the turbocharger does is it takes in 365 CFM past the MAF sensor, and then it compresses it by a ratio of 2.2. That gives us 18 pounds of boost gauge. And then we get we compress it down the same space as 166.2. So now the motor can consume it. And how this works out, remember, it's all multiplication. You can do it whatever way you want, whatever makes most sense. What do we got? So it's 11.634 pounds minute NA. If we multiplied it by the pressure ratio, because it's twice as dense, 11.634 or whatever times 2.2 gives us 25.59. If we want to take 166.2 CFM times the new weight of the cube, it would be 0.07 pounds per cube times 2.2 gives you 0.154 pounds per cube. 0.154 pounds per cube times 166.2 gives you 25.59 pounds minute. So you can do it anyways. I like to do the mass flow and do the total CFM because with the turbo, how you get a 2.2 pressure ratio is the turbocharger is taking 365 CFM and it's shoving it into a system that only can draw 166.2 CFM, right? And those are everybody's boost is bad, boost is yaw, boost is heat. Yes, you have adiabatic heating no matter what the compressor is. Even if it was 100% efficient, it still gets really freaking hot when you have a lot of boost pressure or a lot of mass flow rate. Either of the two things will increase the temperature of the air by the 100% adiabatic efficient number. It's like when you look at like the stuff that runs 700 degrees compressor outlet temperatures, they're actually pretty efficient. They're like 80% efficient, 70 to 80% efficient. Because you go look at the adiabatic compression at 250 pounds minute flow rate at 100 pounds of boost, even if it was 100% efficient, it's still hot. You can't get around it. There is no compressor gets bigger, air gets ice cold scenario that exists. I know that people say that on the internet. I see it every time I'm on the Facebook forums. Compressors running in an inefficient zone, you're just pushing hot air. Not really how it works. Pressure makes the air hotter, but mass flow rate also makes the air hotter. It's molecule interactions. Friction. So you get friction from more mass flow in the same spot, and you get friction from pressure rise. So you have heat no matter what. The big thing is to make sure you're accounting for the heat, whether it's a methanol injected race car, it's a semi-truck with an intercooler that has surface square feet on those things. Huge. You just gotta make sure you account for it. That's all. There's no magic compressor that doesn't heat the air up. The only reason that you think it's cooler is because you're not looking at it, right? And the funny thing about intercoolers is the hotter the air gets coming out of the turbocharger, the better they work. So it's not a bad thing, it's just something to account for. So I think that covers everything. I think we got this pretty good, right? This is all boost does. Screw blower, centrifugal supercharger, turbocharger. They take CFM and they shove it somewhere it doesn't want to go, so it weighs more, and it weighs more by a factor of the temperature that you get it down to, or not down to if you don't run an intercooler, and the pressure ratio, because the motor only knows the differential pressure. So if the motor at 14.7 psia, 100% volumetric efficiency, consumes 200 pounds a minute, if you increase the pressure there, its ability to consume more weight goes up, because that 200 CFM starts to weigh more by a factor of the pressure ratio. So 2.0 pressure ratio at the same IAT, double the flow rate. Same pressure, increase pressure ratio to 3.0, and you cool it back down to the same temperature, triple the flow rate. It's pretty straightforward how it works. This is MAF, so MAF sensors, if you have systems that read in grams second, grams minute, the MAF sensor only knows the temperature change of the diode and the temperature, the ambient temperature going through that area. That's how it finds airspeed, and then it sends that information to the ECM. The ECM runs it through a program that then in the background converts that over to weight. It generally uses the it can use the IAT sensor as well on the engine and the map sensor to double check itself and all that fun stuff, or to use it at different points. Like we said earlier, sometimes a lot of modern spark ignition stuff has two systems on it because either one of the two works better in a different location or gets maxed out at some point. So the map sensor is just the airspeed sensor, and then there's background programming that goes ahead and converts it over to weight for the ECM thing. Say if it has this many grams of air per second or per minute, it can move this many grams of fuel per second or per minute, and you have all your checks and balances or other systems that they can hop back and forth between to try and get the system to run really well in a wide RPM range, especially on spark ignition motors with their really wide RPM range. It's not super hard to say max out a 4-inch intake or a 5-inch intake or a factory 3.5-inch intake. As soon as you double the factory RPM of the engine, say it's a peak, or not to say doubles, kind of maybe extreme, but say it red lines at 5,500 and now it goes to 7,500. Well, that factory size tube's probably too small. The MAF sensor is going to go up to its max, hang there, and then the thing gets confused. Not confused, it just doesn't. It can't compute any farther out. So I have all these tools and sensors, and it's not for lack of trying to use the dyno. It's just time. It's not been like tough as in tough. It's just tough to find time to go do that. Just had to do, try and do a lot of maintenance, and then we all got that life stuff that always pops up that you always got to go do. So I hope that this helps, right? And you do this with whatever engine you want. You can use a QSK 95 liter engine. You can use a train engine out of these things that are ginormous. You can do it with your dirt bike. So, moped, nitro RC car, it's the same on any piston engine. It's probably the same for any engine, but we're talking about piston engines. So, I think that's a thing. I will do a screen record. I don't even know if I need to do a screen record. Maybe I should just do a quick one, just show you. Or maybe we'll make it a short video if you want to see like a screen recording of doing a system. Go ahead and do that. But like I said, on the compressor map, when the thing's super loud and just feels like it's gonna wreck your transmission because it's making so much power, you're not getting this. Maybe if you got a big engine, big boost or whatnot, but you're getting whatever the mathematics estimates you out to be. You're going to be in that range, and the accuracy of the mathematics is going to be based on the accuracy of the sensor data you have on your engine. So you're vaguely estimating if you're guessing, and the more data points you have, the more accurate you are. Now there are tools out there like the Banks thing that do all this for you. Awesome. Someone programmed that thing to just take that information and then run it through a background program and then spit it out as a number that we can understand. I'm not picking on Banks, I'm just saying it's a convenience thing, right? It shortens up the thing, it makes it so you can data log it. You can do this by hand. It's not hard, it takes a few minutes. The most expensive part are some of the sensors, but even still, they're really not that bad to buy. A lot of these temperature sensors anymore. You can do post-intercooler temps with the actual standard fast refresh right diode sensor, because your post-intercooler, unless you're sled pulling in like a middle to higher class, like work stock and above, your intercooler outlet temperatures should be under 300 degrees, and if they are over 300 degrees, you have issues. It's called lost power. And that's why the sled puller guys spend so much money on intercoolers. You've seen some of the billet things on these things. They are ideally you want to be around 40 to 60 degrees. I say 100 degrees and less is pretty good on competition vehicles. Street trucks, you're always going to be about 20 degrees higher than whatever the road temperature is. So not outside temperature, temperature off the road. Because obviously the road heat is what you drive through. So if you're within like 20 to 30 degrees, depending on if you have an AC condenser and stuff in front of your intercooler and all that other jazz, while moving, not while sitting, probably in good shape. You just want to check pressure drop across the intercooler to make sure pressure drop's not, I think general idea of thumb is not more than like 5 pounds of pressure drop, 5 psi from one side to the other. Less is better, but if it's the cost of increased air temperature, then you have to do the mathematics and see if that's worth, is the increase in pressure to the engine outweighing the increase in temperature. So This stuff is pretty straightforward to do. And then as far as like volumetric efficiency goes, peak torque is your highest volumetric efficiency point, and then peak horsepower is, depending on the turbocharger, it'll usually be 8 to 10% lower. It's probably a terrible way to look at it, but until I measure it with the tools, I can kind of see what it's doing. And it's going to change based on the turbocharger, turbine wheel, boost pressure, all that fun stuff. Once I measure it, it'll be nice. We'll have a more set in stone VE set up for factory cylinder heads, aftermarket cylinder heads, cams, all that stuff. Should be able to see this because I have enough standalone sensor system. I should be able to figure all this stuff out. I think it'll be quite helpful for a lot of owners to see. Once you start looking at how much VE gain a part can give you, then you can actually question if it's going to help or not versus using someone else's dyno numbers. I mean, I have a dyno, and I don't like the concept of using someone else's dyno numbers. I think that's a terrible, it's a great way to sell parts. Bad way to see if it's actually what you want in your own vehicle or not. If there's enough dynos, different dynos running the same setup so you can build an average, you're in pretty good shape. But using a singular entity's own dyno numbers is usually marketing. I said I own one, and I'll tell you, they are great marketing tools. Dangerous as heck to be around when you're running them. But that's about it. I think it covers everything. But they said once we start gathering this data, they'd be like, all right, well, this cylinder head with a pretty free-flowing turbocharger or a standard turbocharger that maybe most people are looking at or getting into gives me 3% in this area, or it gives me 6% in this area. I doubt we're going to see 6%, but in this cam, right? This cam might add 1.5% down here, and maybe without the cylinder head it adds 3% here, but with the cylinder head we only see a difference of 4 or 3.5, right? So you can start measuring these things, taking note of them, and then consumers can use that to hopefully get to where they want to go. So turbochargers on turbo diesels are the big ones, right? Because once you go past peak torque, the way that it dives off of peak torque is typically the way that the turbine housing and the turbine wheel are interacting with one another. So that shape, how many foot-pounds of torque does it lose per 1,000 RPMs? So I know we kind of like moved locations real quick. Someone called, I had to answer that. Jesus, what the numbers? I think the next video we'll do, should we do how to think about or how to understand turbocharger rotational speed versus engine consumption rate, like how those two interact with each other? Because I kind of feel like that would be a good way to then move into turbine speed, or do I start with turbine speed and then go to how the compressors interaction with its pressure ratio creation and engine consumption affect, and engine speed affect the rotational speed of the turbocharger, which then affect the rotational speed of the turbine, which affects the turbine's efficiency and flow rate. Because the turbines, how a turbine flows is like this, right? You got, and I have a ton of maps I printed up to show you, but let's just draw a, let's just picture this as like a glass from a side view right here. So we have efficiency, speed, flow rate. So efficiency and flow rate are the verticals and speeds on the bottom, and what you get as the turbocharger accelerates is it gets better and better and better and better, and then it hits the peak, and then they come back down, they get worse, 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 worse as the speed increases. So there's this region up here where the turbines are really happy. So it's an upside down U in the shape, and the turbine housing, turbine wheel maps display this. So like usually on like Garrett's maps, what they do is they usually have a, called an efficiency trend line, where they take the top of that U, and they plot it out for every speed line on the compressor map, and then they make one line that hits the peak of every single one of those. So you get this rise, and then it flattens out because there's a point where it just doesn't consume anymore. It's airspeed dependent or wheel speed dependent. That's where wastegate comes in. And depending on the geometry relationship of the turbine wheel to the turbine housing, depicts at what expansion ratio or pressure ratio. It just depends on how you want to go to terminology. Generally speaking, turbine sides are expansion ratio because it's PSI-A divided by PSI-A. So PSI absolute in the exhaust manifold divided by PSI absolute post turbine wheel is expansion ratio. That's a ratio of two numbers. Just like pressure ratio is a ratio of two numbers. You only have to do the additional work because our boost gauges aren't in absolute, they're in gauge. So gauge is 14.7 equals 0 gauge. I don't know which direction would be easier to understand, if anybody wants to see it or not, but the turbine map is the most important part of the system. Because like we saw with the deal, regardless of the compressor design, if you know the air temperature at the intake valve, pressure at the intake valve, the engine's displacement, RPM, and volumetric efficiency, both the compressor and the engine consume the same weight. Right? That's a base standard. If the compressor design changes and it compresses more air per revolution and you rotate it at the same speed, your boost pressure goes up. No ifs, ands, or buts. In order for the statement to be true that a compressor moves more air on the same engine with the engine's conditions being all identical, boost pressure goes up. Now, how a turbocharger system generally picks up power is because if the compressor wheel changes the speed of the turbine wheel back into a more efficient region, whether it allows it to accelerate and get up to here, or it decelerates it, so if it moves less air and makes the turbine speed up, so this is what you see when you put a smaller turbine housing on a turbocharger and it makes more power. Typically that means you were underdriving the system. You're playing around down here on the turbine map. Or if you put a compressor on that moves more air per revolution, you slow the system down and it ends up back over here. Say you're playing down here and then it comes back over to here, well, you gain power, right? Because what the main contributing factor to why a certain compressor wheel will support more power than another one is how much exhaust gas is being consumed, the boost to drive pressure ratio. So drive pressure is pumping losses and combustion gases left in the cylinder. Now, combustion gases don't reburn well. They do a lot of, on performance stuff, they do a lot of terrible things. They slow down mixing rate, they reduce flame temperature, they slow down the burn speed, mixing rate, burn speed, right? They kind of screw up a lot of stuff. They can reduce the density of the air if it's heating up the air charge coming in the intake. A lot of bad things. And you have pumping losses on turbochargers. So like centrifugal superchargers cost crank power to drive. Turbochargers cost you pumping power. And then the CO2 or the exhaust gas left in the cylinder, power loss, right? Those are your two losses with turbochargers, right? When this is all things, I know, well, if the air temperature didn't, we're not doing it. Air temperatures, everything's the same. The reason you pick up power is because turbine speed changes over to a more optimum, a more efficient, higher flowing region while maintaining the same pressure output and temperature, meaning the engine's volumetric efficiency goes up, pumping losses go down, and power output increases. Okay? That's the really base thing to it. Yeah. So we can do. We probably should do compressor speeds, like the base under, not like measured compressor speeds. Yeah. Just like a base, because we can go from that into compressor speeds, and you can see what compressor speeds do as you near the max flow rate at a map. Like when you look at it, they nose over, but when it's actually, there's a couple things that can actually happen. But say if instead of nosing over, you hold the same PR and keep taking it out, well, you start traversing speed jumps fast. So think about how much faster you start traveling through the turbine map based on turbine speed. Leave it with that, I think. I think that's a good spot. So here's a dynograph that's a really good example of what running too large of a system looks like, where it's underdriving for almost most of the engine's operating RPM range. So pink is a single S480, 87, 110 or 10, and it makes great power, right? Made 841 wheel horsepower, 1215 foot-pounds of torque. Problem is peaking both spots at the same location. So by dropping the compressor wheel size down, we went from a 8087 to a 7287. Now, don't mind so this here is that's injection rate getting screwy. So it was even worse. So like with a bigger set of injectors, it came up to about here and then did this, never recovered. This was kind of like the happy medium of the two. So with smaller injectors, we still ran out of the ability for the VP44 to maintain injection pressure, but it comes up and still kind of holds, and it starts coming back up a little bit because of the methanol injection. So you can see your falls, and then the methanol's on longer and longer and longer. It's still climbing, so the truck's kind of starting to run on methanol at that point. But we can look at the difference in torque production with the 7187 or 7287 at 3,000 RPMs, right? So the 80 mil compressor was making right at, what is that, 600 foot-pounds at 3,000 RPMs, and by just dropping the compressor wheel size down and speeding the whole rotational system up, on the new setup it was making like 1,300 foot-pounds at 3,000. So we're up double the foot-pounds torque compared to the old setup. So this is a bigger turbocharger, and bigger turbocharger equals more air. The issue is that whole statement does not take into context how the mathematics work. And this is a great representation of how the mathematics work. So the pink line is playing around on the underside of turbine speed. So the thing's still not rotating fast enough, and it's finally starting to get happy when it gets up into about 3,500, right? So by dropping the compressor down, we lost no peak power, right? Still 841 on pink, 847 on the red. So lost no peak power. And then under the curve, by getting the speeds right for this thing's RPM band, remember this is all we have at hard limits right here at 36, whatever. But by getting the turbine flow rate up and also getting it to come up on pressure sooner, the motor gets happy a lot faster, and we can inject more fuel sooner and make more torque and more power as far as average. So we look at our averages, same exact truck, both singles. You can see at the starter run we're up on pressures because it's easier to get up on pressure at starter run. So we have a horsepower curve that is here versus the S480's horsepower curve is like E. So the green feels like a two-stroke, and the red wins races. Green feels like nitrous, red wins races because your time down the track is average power applied to the track over the course of 1,000 feet or eighth mile if you're on eighth mile. Um, so that's how you win, given you're running against an equal opponent. So thought this would be a great representation of how turbocharger sizing is important, why understanding maps is important, because we looked at we can only rev to here, and looked at the boost pressures that we wanted to run, the temperature after the intercooler, and that's when we decided that we can drop down to this and average a far better outcome. And then after doing the mathematics and checking this out, we put the system together, put on the dyno, and that's what we got, right? So much faster truck, much better driving experience, just everything was better with no losses, right? Zero losses. So that's where, this is an when you end up under driving turbine. Oop. So hopefully that was enjoyable. I think that's about it. So thought it'd be fun to end it on that. I like this photo that I have. It was a great dyno experience getting to see this. I said the top stuff up here, that's due to injection rate dropping off. We're losing injection pressure due to size of the injector and time at like the injection rate. So time during, like how long the plunger is on the cam lobe versus um, what's actually required to move more mass flow. So that's what that is. You can't even see it on the old charger because we never got there, and then the new charger shows its ugly face because we end up in that scenario. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.